older school marketers still wanted to stick with billboards, but you can't measure their reach, and they wanted to do things because doctors are used to doing marketing in a certain way. And I think that what we've seen is that definitely people are approaching digital. They're thinking about CRMs a lot more. They're really trying to modernize their marketing. Mm-hmm. But if I were making a recommendation to a client, I would tell them to use as many touch points as they know their audiences touch. So, I'm a big believer in continuing to use traditional media tools because I think that people still respond to them.
Welcome to the Magnificent Marketing Podcast, where we interview the top marketing experts in the world and keep you up to date on all the changes and best practices to help you grow your business and stay on the cutting edge. Welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Ahava Leibtag, and Ahava is the president and owner of AHA Media Group, a content strategy and content marketing consultancy founded in October of 2005. And Ahava also wrote a book about the intersection of content marketing and content strategy called The Digital Crown, Winning at Content on the Web. And today we are going to be talking about creative marketing ideas for the healthcare industry. Ahava, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Interested because I haven't, really done a podcast on a specific industry before. So when we were talking about setting this up, I was very interested in, and I'm personally interested in the healthcare industry. We're a bit involved in it ourselves, but I wanted to hear from the master. I know your company specializes in this, so very, very interested to seeing what you have to say. So, but before we get into these specific ideas and all the awesome ideas you are going to provide us, I would like for you just to quickly speak on if there's any differences, like inherent differences for marketing for the healthcare industry versus other industries that we should be aware of.
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I think part of what's happening right now in general is that brands are starting to become aware that they need to focus more on the consumer than they do on the brand. And I've been in healthcare marketing for 11 years, and I've seen that shift happening. So that's nice to see across industries, particularly in healthcare. It's incredibly important because people are scared, they're anxious, they're making very important decisions, and they need a lot of information in order to feel sure enough to make those decisions. So from my perspective, there is not a huge difference between, let's say, like healthcare or financial services or insurance, where there's a lot of jargon and people don't have literacy in those topics until they start to develop them. But obviously, picking a doctor is a lot different than buying a skirt from Gap.com. So I think that the challenges that are inherent in industries where people are making important decisions and using content to do that are different than the challenges faced, let's say, by a retail or other types of businesses.
Understood. So it's not any different than marketing for any other high consideration type of decision, basically. So there's nothing like inherently different that, as we get going that we need to be aware of. You're just pointing out that, it's a pretty intense decision, so you need to market as such.
Right. I think it's an emotional decision. For example, I've done consulting with other industries. One industry that I did consulting with was IT. So IT managers making recommendations to their CIOs about what types of servers to buy and how to move to the cloud, and we worked on white papers around that. And what I saw from that is that there are other topics that people have some literacy in, and then they need to dive in deeper to learn more about something in order to make a decision. But it's not the same as a healthcare decision that's emotional, because we're all making decisions very much based on our gut instinct about things. And so in healthcare marketing, I think we have to really be aware of that and use that to our advantage, but, with integrity, because we know that we're appealing to something sort of that you can't really touch about the way that people make decisions. And so that makes it, I think, a subtle type of industry to work in. Again, financial services, same thing. What do people care about, more than or not even, but like people care about their health the most, and then after that, probably they care about their money. So it's that type. The other thing about healthcare that I'll say is that it's not something that people think about until they need it. So your money you're thinking about probably a lot, but your healthcare is something that you kind of take for granted. And then all of a sudden, if something happens to you or somebody that you love, or you need to switch doctors, or you need to figure out a way to take care of yourself, you're going to start investigating it and learning about it then. And so healthcare marketers are always trying to figure out how can we improve our brand awareness so that when people have a problem, they come to us. So I think those are the two things maybe that make it a little bit different. But,
well, I'm sure. I mean, those are some big differences, Yeah. I mean, those are some major differences. I mean, the tools and the tactics and stuff might be similar, but you're saying go a little bit heavier on the emotional side of things, and we're going to talk about what you just mentioned, because that's actually the major question that I had in my mind is what you just mentioned is, not everybody needs, even when you were saying like people care about their health versus money. But not all the time, right? It's you take it for granted, which is an awful human characteristic of us all. But you take it for granted, right? And that's something we need to figure out to do. But we don't necessarily look for solutions for problems that don't happen yet. So that is something that I'm going to be intriguing and following up with you on throughout this podcast, because that's the name of the game here. It sounds like.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the really nice things about the ACA was that it caused insurance companies to start thinking through wellness content, because that was a big part of how they were going to be rewarded. And so that actually, I think, took healthcare marketing in a certain direction that allows for us to sort of think through, okay, well, somebody's not necessarily in a health crisis when they want to read, about GMOs. That's something that they're not looking for a brand because they have an acute crisis. But if we can sort of give them wellness content that teaches them that we can be their health partner when they do need help, not even just in a crisis, but ongoing care, then that's how we can use that kind of content. So I think we're seeing that shift of understanding how to keep a conversation going with people, even though it's not an acute care situation. It's just, hey, we want to, be your health partner. And then if you ever do need us, we lift our hand and help you. So.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. No, I hear exactly what you're saying. And again, we're going to get into ideas about how to accomplish that, and we'll get there in just a bit. But want to get some groundwork laid here. Traditional media versus digital media. Is it a mixture of both you've seen in your experience? Are you seeing a shift towards digital from traditional, or is the mix 50-50?
So in the organizations that I work with, I'm helping them with their digital mostly. So that's sort of the side that I see. There was a lot of frustration in healthcare marketing about 5 to 7 years ago because older school marketers still wanted to stick with billboards that, you can't measure their reach, and they wanted to do things because doctors are used to doing marketing in a certain way. And I think that what we've seen is that definitely people are approaching digital. They're thinking about CRMs a lot more. They're really trying to modernize their marketing. Mm-hmm. But if I were making a recommendation to a client, I would tell them to use as many touch points as they know their audiences touch. So, I'm a big believer in continuing to use traditional media tools because I think that people still respond to them. So from that perspective, I think it's both, but I do think that there is a shift towards digital, particularly social media, which is annoying to me on some level because social media is just a distribution channel platform type of thing. It's not an actual way to get people. It's an actual way to reach them. And so I would like to see more companies think strategically about their content strategy before they plan their social media strategy.
Yeah, they definitely go hand in hand. And earlier this week, we actually did a podcast with Robert Rose, and it was all about planning before you begin. So, yeah,
I love Robert. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, he's so fun. Yeah, he's awesome. I don't know. I've known of him for
I don't know, 8 years now, I guess. But yeah, just starting to get to know him personally here recently. Yeah, and he's awesome. But that's what he was. That was the name. That's everything, right? Because it's getting more crowded, and more crowded, and more crowded, and your strategy is what's going to set you apart. And obviously the execution, but executing what, right? So you mentioned social media, and the platforms, the distribution platforms. Which ones have you seen that healthcare marketers should pay most attention to?
So I definitely think Facebook is probably their best bet, although Facebook may explode. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 4 years if we make it that long. There are two platforms that I think hospitals and healthcare organizations really need to take advantage of, and they don't as well as I'd like them to, and that's Instagram and Snapchat. And the reason for that is that your future audiences are on those platforms. That's where they're hanging out and spending most of their time. And so I've pitched a couple of ideas. Clients haven't taken me up on it yet, but I really would like to see us start thinking about using Snapchat for nutrition. Young girls are a really great audience for hospitals because they can develop relationships with them early on, and then as they proceed through different parts of their life, they need different services from hospitals, they have different concerns throughout their life cycle. So that's a really great audience, I think, to capture both on Instagram and Snapchat. There are definitely issues with people in their 20s where they're not necessarily going through an acute health crisis, but they definitely have concerns about their health. What should I be eating? How often should I be exercising? Should I buy health insurance? Even though there's a mandate, like maybe it's cheaper to pay the penalty. So using, I think, pictures and storytelling to sort of grab those audiences would be really beneficial. There's a really interesting Instagram. She's not an official Weight Watchers person, although she may be paid by them now. Her name is Ariel, and she's this woman who lost like 90 pounds on Weight Watchers. And every single day she has an Instagram story about like what she ate and how she exercised. When it snowed in New York where she lives, she like pulled herself to the gym even though she didn't want to, and she showed a picture of herself leaving her house, and then she showed a video of her exercising. And I think that that's where brands should be going, not necessarily the influencers, but they should be thinking about, well, how do we tell a story about how we can help people be their best selves, and what are the platforms that are most useful to where not only our current audiences are, but our future audiences are. Because what content marketing really tells you to do is try to build a relationship with people, and I think that those platforms give brands sort of an edge and an opportunity to get in on the conversation early.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I didn't. Instagram made more sense to me, and Snapchat does now that you think about it. I mean, if you're going to be cultivating, that's obviously a very long-term plan. Someone's going to need to buy into that because you're going to be cultivating long-term relationships, and they might not need, you for a while. But it's I can understand if you do move forward with something like that, that would be gargantuan safety net as far as future customers. And so I'm definitely hearing you. So what were you thinking about?
More and more of my friends on Snapchat because their children are on it, and that's a good way for them to know how to use the tool and how the tool works. Obviously, you can't monitor it the same way that you can monitor Instagram, but I'm sorry, I cut you off at your question. I just want to
No, I was just going to ask you to dig into Snapchat. Like, what ideas did you have for that? Like, when you say they should be, starting to utilize Snapchat, like, what would be the strategy behind that as far as the content that they're putting out there, and just talk that through and like how they would go about it. Would it be the doctor themselves? Would it be admins? Would it be messages on Snapchat? Obviously you can do a business account on Snapchat or you can do personal. So what in your mind? What have you what's been percolating up there? Like, what are you thinking?
So the brands that tell stories, like CNN and those types of stories, those would be really great, I think, channels to sort of follow and get ideas from. One of the ideas that I had was around nutrition, because I think that eat this, don't eat this, I think would be, it's a picture and you can grab somebody's attention like that. So certainly thinking through nutrition, exercise, this is the right pose, this is the wrong pose. So sort of thinking through sort of more of these long-term healthcare issues and using sort of listicles and, some of the short bursts of information that help people make decisions and then following those. So you'll see CNN, when they report on Snapchat, they're thinking about what are teenagers interested in the world. They're not showing, what 50-year-olds would be interested in. You can tell it very clearly by the way they tell their stories. So in the same type of way, I think that brands should, and I would be the first person to say this, spend 3 months watching what people are doing on Snapchat. Don't just jump in. I would say that about any platform you start with, and try to figure out, what to do. The thing is that people will say things like, well, my audience really isn't there yet, or, 16-year-old girls can't be my audience because I have to pull people in. You know what's really interesting about 16-year-old girls? They talk to their mothers. And so I think people are sometimes very short-sighted, and well, mine does. She's 14, but they might go to their mother and say, I saw this, or this is where I learned this from. So I think that we're short-sighted sometimes because we say, well, it's not there, so we're not gonna go for it. And I'm a really big believer in spending 10% of your marketing budget on new things. I just did a case study that's on my blog about two healthcare marketers who were at the University of Utah. One is still there, one moved. And they did a Pinterest campaign that was unbelievably successful, and they did it on a lark. It was like, all right, well, let's try it and see what happens. And it's unbelievable the growth that they've had and the reach that they have now. Now, they did use ads, but now they're not running any ad campaigns, and they're still growing exponentially because that's what happens when you use social media appropriately. And they also created a ton of content for this channel that they now can use in a lot of other places. So those are the kinds of stories that I want to shake people and say, don't just do a blog. Think about what are the kinds of things that we can do that are cool and fun. If they don't work, fine, then we know they don't work. But if they do work, what other doors do they open up for us that could potentially be huge?
Yeah, let's talk about this, Pin. The whole idea here of this podcast today is to talk about creative ideas, and these are definitely, out of the box, or they're out of the box. There's something that I would just say most doctors haven't thought of at the very least. For sure, they haven't.
Doctors aren't really the ones that think about marketing when you're talking about at hospitals. In private practices, they do, but they typically hire marketing agencies to do that for them. And I would agree that marketing is pretty tepid. It's not, they're not looking to do something really cool and fun. So I think when you're talking about the people who want to do that, you're talking about big organizations that have money to burn on things like this, and not many do. Not many do.
Well, tell me about this Pinterest. What did they do? What you said they created content for Pinterest, and I think most people view Pinterest as, images. But I'd like to hear what did they do that helped it, take off so much?
So they created boards for women at different ages. They knew exactly who their audiences were. One of the things if you go to read the blog, what you see, and my website is ahamediagroup.com, and the blog is there. What you see that they did that was so interesting was they talked to all the women in their lives and got ideas from them about the types of content that they wanted to see. So they built infographics. They used pictures to push people towards blogs and content. They created a lot of their own original content, and then they used it in other places. One of the people was a marketing manager for both women's health and heart. So she wanted to find a lot of crossover content. So they built a heart board, and then they saw that building by topic made a huge difference. They also watched their trends and saw that school and seasonal things would score really high, so they created boards around those types of ideas. They were very thoughtful in their approach, and once they really figured out what they were doing, they were incredibly strategic. So, a lot of people say, well, how can you even prove that this is doing something? And the answer goes back to one of the first things we talked about, which is brand awareness. We want people in our neighborhoods and in our communities and in the greater area that we're trying to reach that we care about them, we care about their health. And so when they're ready to make a decision, we hope they'll think of us first. And I think that Pinterest board definitely can make that happen because once you pin it or like it, you're constantly swapping. One of the things that Jen said was that they pinned a lot of the people who follow them their stuff because she said if you're a part of a community is giving back. Do you know what it's like for people when they see that the brand is sharing their content? It's huge. So those kind of things make a big difference, and I think that they're important, and I think that, you sort of hemmed and hawed, like, is it really out of the box, isn't it? I don't know how out of the box it is, but I think what is interesting about what they did was they didn't know it was going to work, and they tried it anyway. And they put money behind it. They bought boosts and they bought ads. And I think that shows that there was a willingness to sort of try something that they weren't sure was going to work, and then they found out that it really did work. And they didn't, not that they abandoned it, but they're not putting any resources behind it now, and it's still gathering steam for them.
Nice.
So I think that that's really important.
And it was mainly them. It was basically, it sounds amazing, and that's why I'm so wanting to plow into this, because it is something that I haven't heard in this industry. So obviously, you mentioned that it's the blogs and the content that that were what they were distributing there. But what do you think made it take off so much? Obviously, it was a segmentation and it was speaking directly to those groups. But was it did they pay like super duper attention to the imagery for Pinterest? Was it like extra more so than you would normally do for like a thumbnail image or a header image for a blog? Is that what you think made it take off versus the content itself? Or what do you think really was the key driver there?
I don't really know. I'll tell you what they said. What they said was that they noticed that they did best when they created original content. So probably, and there was one particular infographic, I can't think of it right now. I think it had something to do with being at work that really took off for them. Like once they published that, they got a ton of traffic. So I think it's sort of catching some sort of wave at the right moment. It's kind of like you go down a street with a lot of traffic lights and, you hit the timing perfectly so that you're going through right when it turns yellow. And I think that that's kind of where they got to. They got to a place where they just kind of figured out how to follow the wave. The other thing I really like about what they did, and what I would tell any healthcare marketer listening, is to learn from the things that you do. So there's always a learning about what should we have done differently, and there's always a learning about what should we keep doing. And I think that was an important part. When you read the interview, you can see that they were thinking those things through, and they were thinking about, well, what can we do better? How can we improve? And what should we abandon because it's just not working?
Yeah.
So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't really know what made it work, but it did, and I think it's a really great opportunity for other healthcare marketers to think through.
Yeah, absolutely. And circle back to your point is, taking 10% of your budget and trying something new. So, it's worth giving it a go, giving it a real go, obviously. But, trying this, trying that out, because you never know what might strike gold for you, because it sounds like they probably got like an exponentially high return on, their investment that they were looking there. So, try different things. So now circling back to what we were talking about, you've mentioned, content a few times. And so it sounds like definitely content marketing is a good form of marketing for the healthcare industry. Are there any differences to consider or anything specifically that might be different for the kind of content that you're putting out for healthcare services? Is there anything you can speak on there?
Well, I think if we're defining content marketing as brands publishing points of view and answering questions so that people will come to them when they have a need, I think that in healthcare they just have to be really careful about being subtle about that point and making sure that they really do have a sharp point of view. Sometimes we'll talk to doctors and they'll say to us, well, we don't really have any differentiators, and we won't accept that because every brand has a different story to tell. And so for their content marketing, they really need to sort of take a point of view and stick with it and make sure that it's what they want to put out there in the marketplace. Part of what complicates this for them is politics. And so from our perspective, sometimes we wade into things we don't really want to be involved with because, this doctor's arguing with this doctor about what their point of view is. So before you sort of start with a content marketing project, you have to make sure that the experts are in agreement about how they're going to address this particular issue that you're writing about. And then I think sort of subtly weaving it into the messaging of whatever piece you're doing, not saying like, so if you have breast cancer, come to us, but more about this is how we would treat a breast cancer patient, I think is really important. I think when Cisco publishes a white paper about a server, everybody knows that they should use Cisco. It's pretty clear, right? And I think that anytime somebody downloads something from a hospital's website or reads a hospital website's article page, they know that they should use that particular brand, but I don't think the sell is as obvious. It should be as obvious.
And you mentioned emotion being a big part. Earlier when we first kicked off. How have you seen some healthcare marketers or healthcare services marketing themselves through a form of content, but tying in emotion? Like, can you help people understand that a little bit better? Like can you give us some examples of tying emotion into a content piece and hitting on education and the emotion at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's storytelling, really, and I think it's, taking the story of a patient or taking the story of a clinician, or even just, some hospitals have had success, marketing their orderlies, there are some people who just take pictures of their orderlies and put them on Instagram.
100%.
So I think it's storytelling. I think it's understanding that at its core, healthcare defines people. So, if you talk to a cancer survivor, like that part of their life is very vibrant to them. They remember it. It's very clear. It defines a part of who they are. And, I made it through cancer, and, I made it through heart disease, or I'm taking care of my heart disease. I'm a diabetic. They put these things into nouns, right? It's a really important thing for who they are. And so I think that sort of trying to understand that somebody consuming a patient testimonial or a patient story or a story about a doctor is really trying to put themselves inside the center of the story, and using techniques in writing and videography and photography to sort of make somebody feel like they're a part of that story, I think is really the way to pull the emotion, is to use the emotion to pull the person in.
Now, what about the legality of that, of storytelling and talking about a patient without obviously mentioning the patient's name? Is there anything to be concerned of there if you are wanting to talk about this cancer survivor and what they went through and why what this particular doctor or doctor's office was able to identify and how they handled it, and write about that? Because to me that'd be very compelling content, very compelling story to read about, especially if I'm going through cancer or if I know somebody that is. Is there anything on the legality side to be concerned about there?
Well, I would never write about a patient unless I got their permission and had them sign a HIPAA form. So I would never try to shade it or say, like, this cancer survivor went through. A doctor can tell a story about a patient, but you really want to disguise the details of who they are. So I think that I would be very careful about that, because it's not worth it to get sued over a piece of marketing.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And but when you say, but just to make sure nobody makes this mistake, if a doctor was telling a story without mentioning anything about the patient outside of, the patient being able to match up that, hey, that's what they were talking about. I think I was doing some research on this and came across somebody posted like some inner organ of somebody on Facebook. They got in trouble for that because that patient recognized that was like, that's my organ.
Really? That's crazy.
Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy, but it happened. And they, I don't know how bad a trouble they got into, but so obviously posting, that was, literally something of that person. So I can understand how that might have fallen. But is there, in your experience, like just talking about a story without mentioning anything about the patient, their name, anything like that, is that still something to always be, careful about and concerned about, to make sure if you're even going to be telling a story about this person to still get a sign off from them?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on what the interview is about, what the doctor's trying to sort of prove by telling the story or illustrate. I think it's a gray area, and I think that good marketers always are conservative with these types of things. But if the doctor says, I had a young woman who had lung cancer and, we were able to operate on her and she was fine, I don't think that that's something that you need to worry about. But if there are other, he says she's a 34-year-old woman and she lives in Washington, D.C., and, she has 3 children, and we were able to operate on her and she's fine and now she's back to work at her job at the USDA, I think that that's probably too much of a giveaway.
Be careful.
And
be careful.
Yeah, be careful. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Now, on the flip side of this, we're talking about a lot of good ideas here. What are some common mistakes you've seen some healthcare industries make when they've applied content marketing? What are some of the common mistakes made that you've seen?
So the first mistake that they make is that they talk about their brand and they use their name constantly. And I'm always saying to them, we don't need to put your name in the content. They're on your website, so they know who you are. So that's a major mistake that they make. Another major mistake that they make is that they let doctors dictate the way marketing should go. And that is a huge mistake because doctors they're not marketers, and that's not their area of expertise. And even though they're frontline and can give us a lot of very important information about how patients are looking for information and the kinds of information that they want to know, they're not strategists, and they can't possibly understand the entire picture or the tools and technology that are out there because, quite frankly, most marketers feel themselves that they devote all day to this and they don't fully understand all the tools and the landscape that's out there. So that's the second mistake that I make. The third mistake that I see...
Can I follow up on that question real quick, on that point?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so how have you seen people, because... I don't know how to phrase this, but, doctors, it seems like it might be hard to approach to tell them that they're wrong. How have you seen somebody work around, like, not letting the doctor dictate, but how have you seen them massage the right idea by them or to them?
So doctors are like dogs. They'll bark at you, but once they get the feeling that you're the master, they're not really going to give you a hard time. Then they smell fear, and then they use it to their advantage. So they're also, you have to remember, they're scientists and they're academics, so you appeal to them through data. So I'll give you some examples from my early days as a freelance web writer for hospitals. Hypertension versus, high blood pressure. So doctors would want to use hypertension because, God forbid, their colleagues should read, an article that's part of their clinical service line that says, high blood pressure when it's really called hypertension. So I'd bring in data and I would show them, if you write hypertension, you're going to get 9,000 hits, and if you write high blood pressure, you're going to get 14,000 or whatever it is. And that data would convince them because you can't really argue with numbers, and they don't believe in arguing with numbers. Another example that I can use is having doctors understand what patients really want to hear about and showing them message boards of what patients are writing about, actually finding their names in message boards and saying, like, look, this heart failure patient was asking another heart failure patient about what she can expect when she goes to see you. Don't you want to address those questions online so that they're answered for her and she doesn't have to ask somebody on a message board, but it's showing that you're available to give her the information that she needs? So there's absolutely a way to approach doctors. When we write content for hospitals, we have a sheet at the beginning of every deck that lists 3 studies on web writing best practices and why we write the way that we write. And very often, doctors will come back to us and say, I didn't really buy this, but when I saw the studies, I understood that you really knew what you were doing. So I always say to them, we're using evidence-based marketing, right? In the same way that they use evidence-based medicine, they base their treatment on protocols and research studies. We base the way that we market on knowing things about user experience and the kinds of information that people want and the research that we've done in our audiences. And so that's how you go to them. You don't let them dictate to you. You collaborate with them and you educate them about things that they don't know about so that they can be informed to make the right decision. So, and I think that's true about anybody you work with. People can't be expected to know everything. A lot of times they come at you like they do, and that's just knowing how to talk to them and understanding that they just want to feel confident in your approach.
Fantastic answer, Hava. I mean, you said that so clearly. I can't imagine anybody not knowing how to approach a doctor, be it somebody who's within the same company or a marketer. So, fantastic answer.
Practice. It's practice.
I can tell.
You have to learn how to do it, but once you do it a few times, you get good at it.
Absolutely. And you were saying a point number 3 on...
And point number 3 is that they don't necessarily understand that the devil is in the details. So very often they want to give these sort of like big overviews of a disease. And And I always say, you need to actually give people real details about surgical approaches, about kinds of drugs that you use in chemotherapy, about these are the things patients really want to know about. They don't want you to educate them about their disease. They can go to WebMD for that. What they want to know is, how are you going to treat me, and what are you going to do that's different from somewhere else? Now, this is obviously disease-based. So if somebody has stage 4 cancer, they're going to be looking at your content very differently than somebody who has, a temporary, a skin rash, and they just need a dermatologist to look at it and tell them how to treat it. So there are varying degrees of how much detail you want to give. But my feeling is that when you, and the web is beautiful for this, because you can put your content in such a hierarchy that you give the 101 information on top, but you make sure that people know that if they dig a little deeper, they're going to find answers to those more complicated questions. And I think I see that mistake over and over again, that we bury the lead and we don't put the important information that patients really want to know in the places where they're going to see it first.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Great stuff, Ahava. Great stuff. Now, you've touched on this a bit, but video, you've said it kind of on the side a couple times throughout this podcast. So I think when people think of videos, they think, especially in older school marketplaces like healthcare, they're probably thinking, big TV media buys and stuff like that. I mean, is that what somebody, if they're going to, invest in video, is that where they should go, or do you see the need for video across the board, period?
No, I think that people should be thinking about every kind of video. So short bursts of video that you take with your, phone. I think professional videos of patients and doctors and interaction. Getting a camera guy to come out and, video a panel. I mean, I think there's all kinds of video that you can use. There's something called the rule of 4 in content strategy, which is for every piece of content you develop, you should have a video, a graphic, a written text, and an audio piece. Now, not every piece of content lends itself to that, but if you're thinking about marketing from a holistic perspective, you know that there are different kinds of learners. And so trying to create content that appeals to all those different kind of learners is probably the best bet that you're going to have when you're thinking about how to appeal to your audiences. So from my perspective, video is definitely a huge piece of a content strategy in healthcare, but it has to be used wisely. And I think a lot of people don't want to watch video the way that hospitals want to create video. So they want to do these 4 to 9 minute profiles. And people aren't going to watch that if they're not really interested in what the disease is about. If they're really interested, they're going to watch 45-minute videos. So my thinking is you want to produce short bursts, 45 to 60-second videos that teases something else that then people can go read about or, learn more about from a different kind of piece of content.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Probably have about 10 or 15 minutes left with you, so we'll try to get through the rest here. But I definitely have some other things I want to go over with you. Interactive content. Well, first, quickly just describe what interactive content is, and then I'd like to have you, share any ideas that you've seen in this realm being, done really well for this healthcare industry here.
Well, it would be actually far more interesting for me to hear you define it, because it could mean 1,000 things to different people.
Well, interactive content, as I see it, is, like quizzes, games, calculators,
gotcha. Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Right.
So have you seen, well, I know actually was on a site today, the American Heart Institute, and I know they have different quizzes and stuff like that. So I know that could be cool, but have you seen anything else out there that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, we create content like that. So I think that that's an important thing to think through about how you want people to use that kind of content and how the kinds of questions that you ask and what you give them as a reward for taking the quiz or, looking at it from that perspective. There's also something really interesting about long-form content where, people sort of take storytelling and turn it into an actual sort of web experience that you can have. So the New York Times famously did this with a mountain climb. I forget which one it was, but they really showed this sort of beautiful way of exploring exactly how it worked out in terms of how they climbed and how far they got and, everything in relationship to each other. I don't really know how you would adapt that to healthcare. I'm sure there's a way to do that. It's probably very expensive, and I don't know what you probably get a lot of press for it, but I don't know that it would necessarily bring in patients. So from my perspective, you have to, when you're sitting down, you're trying to answer 5 questions. Who are we talking to? Who are we as a brand? What are we trying to say? How are we saying it? And when and where do we say it? And that's all you need to think about. And if you can answer those questions and you have solid answers for those questions based on your research and your data and your strategy, then figuring out what types of content just falls out of this. We just created a content marketing tool where you can go in and you can answer 3 questions and we'll tell you the type of content that you should create. So thinking about quizzes and interaction is based on how much time does your audience have and what's the win for you if they complete that quiz or they interact somehow with the content.
All right. Moving on to direct response, trying to get immediate business, because everything we're talking about is, building trust and authority and eventually getting clients, but online pay-per-click or a Google AdWords. Do you see that as a place that people should still be spending their money to get patients?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's too crowded, and organic reach is unless you've been around for a long time, it's going to be hard for you to climb to the top. So absolutely, there's a place for that. I think driving traffic towards what you want people to see is really important. My only caveat is that whatever you're driving them to better be strong, because if they hit an ad and you spend the money on it, you want them to either keep exploring from that page or you want them to actually answer the call to action. So again, it's an integrated approach, right? We have to use everything that we have at our disposal. We have to be smart about the way we use our resources. And we have to remember that ultimately our goal is to try and keep either patients coming back to our content or actually doing something with our content, whether it's completing a call to action or, sharing it or whatever it is that we want them to do. And so I think I don't know if any healthcare organization right now on the planet could really distinguish themselves just through their organic reach. I don't think it's possible at this point anymore.
Okay. All right. So, that's what I was going to, I had a question to ask you about that. So, worrying about the SEO, you're saying it's just, good luck, basically, in regards to that. That's not going to necessarily be a strategy that you need to be focusing on, getting them ranked higher? Or does it really depend, how many big hospitals are there per a city, right, or emergency, clinics? I'm sure that there's some, but you would think that there still might be, for an individual city, there could be a benefit there. Am I incorrect there? Or are you saying
there's 4,000 hospitals in the United States.
Okay.
So there's a lot. I'm not at all saying that you shouldn't pay attention to your SEO. Your pages should be meta tagged appropriately. They should be written with web writing best practices. They should have links. They should have headings. They should have H2s. Absolutely, you need to be paying attention to that. What I'm saying is that if you want to stand out in the marketplace, you should probably use some sort of online advertising. I'm not a big believer in banner ads, but I do think that using Google Ads or any of the search engines to sort of get your content at the top is helpful. Now, remember, rank is decided by how much traffic goes to the page and finds it useful. So if they come to you through an ad and they find that the content useful, you will rise in the rankings. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to move people towards your content. Now, we know that people will click on the first 3 organic links, and there are hospitals who spend a lot of time trying to get to those top 3, and I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that as long as they're using white hat techniques. So
Gotcha.
I absolutely think you should be paying attention to your organic SEO. You asked me, should hospitals use that or not? And my response is they should absolutely use it for crowded
Gotcha.
keywords, diabetes, heart disease, orthopedics, joint replacement, sports medicine. Like you said, there's hospitals, there are cities that have 4 or 5 major hospitals or hospital systems competing. If they're looking for local customers, then absolutely using those kind of ads are critical. And not just ads in digital, but ads in traditional media as well.
Awesome. And I know another big ranking factor that helps companies is getting reviews. But is there a difference where you should be gathering reviews for healthcare professionals? Is it Yelp, or are there specific other industry sites that you need to be paying attention to?
Reviews. So there's actually a hospital system, I can't think of who it is, who implemented reviews on their doctor's database, and they actually upped their patient volumes, or something happened because they did that, and they showed success there. This is what I think about reviews. I think people are going to put them wherever they want, because if you're listed, then you're going to get listed on Google, you're going to get listed on Yelp, you're going to get listed on HealthGrades or whatever else. So there are always going to be reviews, and you can't necessarily control where the reviews are happening. What I think you do need is some sort of monitoring software so that if somebody posts a bad review, you can go in and combat it. So my experience, and I'm only talking about myself, I haven't spent a lot of time delving into this issue, but when I see that a doctor gets a bad review and then either the doctor or somebody from the doctor's office says, we're so sorry you had that experience, we'd like to reach out to you to solve it, I'm going to discredit that one star that they gave the person, because it showed that they were responsive and they took their customer seriously. When I see a couple of bad reviews and I don't see any response from the brand, I'm out of there. So from my perspective, you're not going to stop people from reviewing you. There's no way to do that. But if you're responsive to the reviews that you get that are negative or even positive, thank you for leaving this, it made us so happy to be able to care for you. And again, you have to be careful because of HIPAA that you don't give anything away, then I think that's what people should be doing. Most good hospitals and healthcare organizations have a social media playbook and they have a crisis playbook. So they've already sat down with their lawyers and their marketers and their doctors, and they've figured out policies and procedures that they use when these types of things happen. So if you're a healthcare marketer in an organization that doesn't have one of those playbooks, you definitely want to develop one as soon as possible, because the emergency is going to hit before you're ready for it. You know, they say change before you have to. So I think most organizations understand that they need that, and they already have it, and they're sophisticated in their approach.
Yeah, and let me just talk from a personal experience, and it actually happened yesterday for me. My wife just had a major procedure. She had like a hysterectomy, and it was, at a young age, and it's a big deal. And my wife was just overjoyed by this doctor here in Austin that just did such a phenomenal job for her that she wrote this super long positive review. And he went out of his way, and him personally replied to it and was just like, oh my God, I'm blown away by this. Thank you so much. And that just, I can't even tell you how happy that made my wife. And she's had such a good relationship with this guy that she's, and that she showed it to me yesterday. It actually happened a bit ago, but she's actually, it's inspired her to try to team up with him and try to start a foundation for women who go to spread the awareness of people who have really bad endometriosis and issues, with all that area of their body. And the way he's reacted with her has now, she's about to go out and going to be like singing his praises to a huge degree now. That will really be needle movers. So you never know who you might inspire just based on your awesome interaction with them, be it, replying to a poor review or a positive one, because I think a lot of people probably don't even think about it. But I'll tell you right now, it's going to move the needle to the tune of a ton for this guy, because my wife is all passionate about doing this now. So it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm seeing it happen in my own household, So that's a great point. And I never even thought about replying to positive reviews. It didn't even, when you said it, it just struck my memory. I was like, oh yeah, that just happened. That's amazing. Right. Awesome. Well, measurement. What should people be paying attention to with their metrics?
Oh my gosh, everything. I don't know. It's changing so rapidly. I think that people they're having measurements set that they're now finding aren't really helping them make determinations of what's really important. So I'll give you an example. We just did an audit for a big pediatric healthcare center, and we found that one of their websites was getting a lot of traffic from all over the country, and it didn't really make sense because the rest of their website was getting traffic from their, the surrounding areas. A couple of bigger states, but mostly the surrounding areas. So they asked me, well, why do you think this is happening? And I said, because you've written about rare fetal conditions. And because you've written about them, people are coming almost as like a WebMD. And so measuring your traffic in that case isn't going to do anything for you, because people are not coming to where this place is from California. They're probably going to find, a neonatologist there. So I think that organizations kind of had certain metrics that they wanted to measure, and now they're sort of shifting over to thinking about it from a more strategic point of view. I think implementing CRMs and using those to prove the efficacy of marketing is going to be huge for healthcare marketers in the next 5 to 7 years. I think figuring out, so I remember people would talk about how many likes you had on Facebook. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so what? Who cares? If that's helping your reach, great. But if most people are ignoring your content, it doesn't matter how many likes you have, people aren't clicking through. So I think people are trying to define the metrics that define success, and it's different everywhere, and it's different based on campaign. It's different based on what the strategy is for that particular service line or what you're trying to promote. So I think looking at all the different things you can measure and then deciding what really are the things that are determining our success, and then shifting if you find that those things change.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. To kind of tie things up here, a couple last questions. If you had to pick one main goal to set for healthcare marketers, what should it be?
That's a good question. I think just get to know your audience. Just spend as much time with them as you can, because it'll make you a better marketer.
Yeah, it'll tie everything like what you mentioned about that Pinterest board. They all they really learned about their the individual things that those individual demographics were interested in, and they wouldn't have done that.
If they had been friends with your wife, they might have learned more about endometriosis and what the potential treatments for that is, and they could have created an infographic out of that. So that's exactly what happened for them. They said, we weren't necessarily having a baby, but our friends were having babies, so we listened to what they talked about. They wanted to know because they were having babies. So it's exactly what I think people should be doing. When I was a web writer, I used to hang out in the waiting room and talk to patients about the things that they wanted to see online, and it changed the web content radically. I would have doctors tell me, like, thank you so much for writing one line about bringing a snack for your first appointment. That made such a difference. But I got that information from watching people get annoyed that they were hungry and they were waiting such a long time. So if you can spend time with your audiences, and I really think you should do this once every couple of weeks, you're just going to get better at what you do.
Absolutely. All right. One big marketing prediction you have for the future of this industry?
I think that they're going to start going back to experimenting with I think they're going to start experimenting with downloadable content and using that to prompt their CRMs. I think they're going to get better at nurturing, and I think that they're going to plot their marketing through a series of 6 to 8 touch points rather than trying to paper the field with their brand and what they're trying to say.
Gotcha. And I think they're going to learn a lot from you in all this. It sounds like you have brought a lot of experience. I mean, starting from your very first job, it sounds like, or one of your very first jobs.
I don't know that much. I don't. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. But
I beg to differ. Well, Hava, this has been a lot of fun, very educational, greatly appreciated. How can people continue to learn from you?
So, like I said, we have a blog, and you can find it at ahamediagroup.com. We also publish once a month a healthcare marketing newsletter that people can read about the latest trends and what's going on in healthcare. You can find me on Twitter, and Ahava L is my handle. And I'm happy to answer people's questions. I get emails, not as much as I used to. I don't know, maybe people have become shyer, but I used to get a lot of questions just randomly from people, and I love that because it's always just fun to collaborate with people on what it is that they're thinking through and the challenges that they have. And I try not to be didactic. I try to be more like, well, what do you think? And sort of figure out what they need to do and how to help them do it. So absolutely, people can reach me in all different kinds of ways.
Awesome. And for the listeners out there, it's Ahava L. It's AHAVAL. So ask Ahava. No, ask Ahava is what you should do. Ahava L is the Twitter handle. Well, Ahava, thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to talking with you again, and hope you have a good one.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thank you so much.